Hello, and thank you for tuning in to Starting Small. Today, I'm joined by JW Wiseman of Curious Elixirs. JW, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks for having me, Cameron.
Yeah, so to kick things off, I'd love to start out with your upbringing. Where did you grow up, and what would you say your childhood was like?
I grew up in Tulsa, Oklahoma, so far away from the mean streets of Brooklyn where I am right now.
Yeah.
It was a good childhood. It was my parents co-parented well. They split up when I was, 6 months old, but they were able
Mm,
to kind of find that balance of, my brother and I spending 2 nights a week with my dad, and and my mom having us the rest of the week. And so they were able to balance that well. And it was, kind of some of the roots of Curious Elixirs were even sown in those early days, because part of the reason why my dad left was he had a big drinking problem, and he
mm,
was able to overcome that and to kind of put alcohol behind him. And then later in life, he was able to become kind of a sober, curious person, and just drink a little bit. But he still was
mm.
always a big fan of making options for people who didn't drink, because he was always that guy at the party who was like, "What am I stuck with water? Like, what's
Yeah,
going on here? You got to have iced tea. You got to have lemonade. You got to have something." So,
yeah. Well,
yeah,
we'll certainly dive into that as it sounds like that's a huge part of the story there. But
yeah.
getting into some of your interests growing up as a kid, what would you say like you enjoyed athletics or entrepreneurship, lemonade stands? I'm curious.
Yeah, I loved cooking. I was cooking in the kitchen from a young age, gas range from like the 1950s that my mom let me cook on starting at age 6. Not
Yeah.
recommended probably, but made it through just fine. Other things that I love doing, I did start my own business at age 11 actually. My first
Mm,
business, I would get onto early bulletin board systems. This is, before America Online and stuff like that. My dad was a bit of a tech head, so he had
mhm.
given me like a hand-me-down Macintosh that was connected to a 2400 baud modem, and I would get on bulletin board systems so that we could trade cheat codes for video games. So,
Wow.
this is back in like Nintendo Power days and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
so we were getting like cheat codes off of the early internet, which I would compile on the Macintosh, and then I would sell those cheat codes at school and at the local
Wow.
arcade. So that was my first business. It was called Button Busters, kind of a
Very
silly
cool.
name, but that was really fun. I had a deal with the local arcade operator, like, hey, I'll sell these here. I'm putting all the money back into your machines, and it makes people better at the game, so they're spending more.
So
So we
cool.
had we had kind of a deal. Yeah.
I love it. Wait, you said you were 11 at that time?
Yeah, I was 11, maybe
Wa
12 years old. Yeah, I wasn't driving
Wow.
yet.
Wow. So what did like transactions look? Was it just like a few quarters, like cash from kids getting it from their parents? What was that?
Yeah. It was $2 to $3 per sheet of codes. Yeah.
Wow. Very
So,
cool.
but it was this must have been 92, 93. So it was right when like Mortal Kombat and Mortal Kombat 2 were like the hot games.
Yeah.
So I had like the codes for that, and Street Fighter 2, and a few codes
Sweet.
for like NBA Jam and stuff like that.
Oh, for sure. I love it. Well, I saw you eventually went on to study at Cornell. What did you study there, and then what led you to go there from Tulsa to New York?
Well, it was the best school that I got into, and so I'm kind of one of these people where like you've got to at least try to go as high as you can, and even if I got rejected from Harvard and Yale and Stanford and those places, I still had to try, and
Yeah.
I ended up going there because it was the best school that I got into, and they had an incredible um, concert commission, which I ended up running, which kind of taught me how to do marketing. So
Mm,
that was really great. And I also studied American Studies, which is an interdisciplinary major. So I was studying popular culture, music, architecture, government.
mm,
And I still draw on some of those learnings today, and how I think about, making curious work. And like one of the things I learned in American Studies at Cornell was when they first came out with like Betty Crocker and Duncan Hines cake mix boxes. they weren't a hit right out of the gate because the people, particularly women at home who were cooking, they didn't even they had like powdered egg in the box, so they didn't even feel like they were really cooking enough. They
Yeah,
and so when they took the egg out of the box, and it'd be like you crack a fresh egg in and you make it, it made them feel like they were having like a little bit more of a ritual. They were adding something to the process.
for
And
sure.
that's part of the reason why when we have Curious Elixirs today, all you need is like the right glass, and you can like garnish it with something fun that you really love.
I
So
love
you're
that.
still adding your little bit of magic to it,
Totally.
even though we've done the hard work of getting, blood oranges from Sicily and blending them with roots and herbs to make like a fancy spritz. You're still
Yeah,
the one who's like adding fresh rosemary or fresh peel. And that all
I
came
love it.
from like learnings at Cornell from shout out to my professor, and advisor, Glenn Altschuler. He taught me so many things about popular culture.
I love it. Well, leading up to Curious Elixirs and post graduation, what did that journey look like for you? So, I mean, career wise, I know you got into working at an agency or running your own agency. What did that journey look like?
Yeah, well, it was a bit of an evolution. I think like most people's careers are, where you're not necessarily in one industry for your whole career anymore. So when I
Hmm.
first started in New York City, I was working in entertainment. I worked for Whoopi Goldberg as my first paying job in New York City, and
Very cool.
for her NBC sitcom, which ran for one season. And
Mm,
I learned a lot. I learned how to be scrappy. But then after that show got canceled, then I worked doing marketing for Broadway shows like Wicked and Spelling Bee and The Wedding Singer. And
very
what I
cool.
learned from that was apply your scrappiness to even these things that seem like they're like a big production. They don't have big
Hmm.
marketing budgets or advertising budgets. So
Yeah.
we were trading tickets for ad space. Like we're
Mm,
not spending cash, you know.
yeah.
Um, and that I applied to the first startup that I worked for, because after working, on Broadway and in TV and film for a few years, it didn't end up being kind of creatively fulfilling in the way that I hoped it would. But I found
Mm,
that when I was doing marketing, that was actually very creatively fulfilling. So I was like, let me do that for a startup. This is back in 2006, and I became the third employee at Thrillist, which is a
mm,
digital media company. And I applied the same kind of thing to them. We didn't have huge budgets. I was like, let's trade digital ad space for digital ad space in order to grow our audience. And through
mm.
those barter relationships, that's really how we started to build that audience from, 10,000 readers when I started to 5 million readers when I left.
Wow. That's incredible. So you mentioned along this journey, I mean, it started even when you're growing up with your dad, and also some of your first jobs are that classic Cornell, but getting into Curious Elixirs, um, at what point did you start the prototyping process or like just fascination overall of creating a
Mhm.
cocktail or a mocktail out of different source ingredients? I'm curious.
Yeah. So while I was at Thrillist for, 7 years, I had a deep love affair with cocktails and cocktail culture and
Hmm.
hospitality in general. I also worked in as a bartender through college, in Ithaca. And so this kind of I loved working in hospitality. But while I was at Thrillist, I opened a whiskey bar with my brother, and we also opened a nightclub. So I was kind of juggling a couple different lives.
Mm,
And while you're, working in a big city like New York and you're doing well, you can drink an awful lot and still be highly functional.
yeah.
And I just had a crazy night where I had 20 drinks in one night, and the next day I didn't even have a hangover, and that was what scared me.
Mm,
So started tinkering in my kitchen. Just I still was like, hey, I still want something adult to drink. I just don't want the alcohol. And so I was like, what if I could make a non-alcoholic Negroni? What if I could make a non-alcoholic spritz? Um, and what if that could actually make me feel better rather than feeling shitty? That
yeah.
was really where it started to go. And so my wheels started turning. The prototyping process started with, okay, Curious number one, which is, the name of it is kind of an ode to some classic cocktails like, Corpse Reviver number two and things like that.
Yeah.
So that's why we have the numbering system.
Very
And
cool.
it looked like starting with hibiscus and ginger and different spices and figuring out how we can have something that has a beginning, middle, and an end to it when you taste it. so that it's not like a soda where you have like one note, you sip it and it's gone. You know,
Yeah.
that's kid stuff. There's plenty of great options for that. Plenty of sweet drinks out there. But what
Yeah.
about bitter herbaceous drinks? And so it took a lot of tinkering in the kitchen and talking to a lot of professional bartenders and mixologists to
Mhm.
figure out kind of like what would they be looking for, what would be special, what would be unique. And at the same time, I was having conversations with one of my best friends who was totally sober, had been sober for a few years, and he gave me a key insight, which was, people who are in recovery, they don't necessarily want to drink something, even a non alcoholic version of what they used to drink when they were drinking. It can be
Yeah.
triggering, but they still want something that's celebratory, that feels unique and delicious. And so that's really what we've always set our sights on from day one is make something that's unique and something that makes people slow down and they can toast each other's health. It
Mm.
doesn't have to be exactly what you had back when you were drinking,
Yeah.
alcohol. It should be something special and new.
Totally. So in those early days of launch, you mentioned you started out with like the hibiscus side. First of all, like why go into that side first as a flavor, and then what did that rollout look like when you officially then went to market, flavor wise?
Yeah, so, the original prototype, for Curious number one was kind of more like a hibiscus ginger thing, but it wasn't really giving me like Negroni vibes. It
Yeah.
was a delicious drink. And the reason why I started with that is that hibiscus is really good for you. And it almost has like a tannic mouthfeel to it where it feels thick and robust in your mouth. It doesn't feel like a sparkling water that just kind of like disappears immediately.
Hmm.
But what we did instead was we got organic pomegranates and we infused that with gentian root. Gentian is one of the key ingredients in Campari. And
Mm.
then we mixed it with dried lemon and bitter orange and a few other secret ingredients to kind of make this non alcoholic Negroni meets a dry Lambrusco. I don't know if
Yeah.
you are familiar with, a dry Lambrusco. It's like a sparkling red wine that typically finishes very dry
Yeah.
and that kind of makes you want to take another sip. And so that's what I wanted to bring to it is like something that is not quite, something you've had before, but something both nostalgic and new at the
For
same
sure.
time. Yeah.
Totally. So I first of all, I love the product and I was able to enjoy it myself. But looking at it today, it's in these like really, I would say, elegant bottle packaging. The branding is nice. There it is, right there. I d So in the early days, did it start out with the glass bottles, and what did like packaging, and how did you end up
Yes.
on glass bottles as well? I'm curious.
Yes. Well, glass bottles because they're the best, you
Yeah,
know?
I agree.
Um, they preserve the product the best. Also, it seems like if you're having one of these in a bar, you know, you just crack it open, you've got it in your hand. Nobody knows,
Yeah.
they don't know what you're drinking, what you're having. Um, and that was really especially important 10 years ago when we first launched
Hmm.
because there was still this stigma around not drinking. And I think that, you know, now that stigma is starting to change because people are talking about it a lot more. They're like, you know what, I'm not really drinking these days, or I'm totally sober. And it doesn't have to
Yeah.
be because they're in recovery. It might be, but it might just be a personal choice, or it might be a health thing, or it might just because they want to have better sleep or not take on as many calories or as much sugar.
Yeah.
So that was really the reason to have glass bottles was to make something that was elegant and premium and
Mhm.
where nobody would like look twice if you were having one of these in a restaurant or a bar.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. So in the early days, I know you guys are heavy D2C today, but rolling out, did you launch D2C, and what did that go to market look like then officially?
Yes. Yeah, direct to consumer was the first thing that we did. While
Mhm.
I was at Thrillist, we also acquired a company called Jack Threads and an e-commerce business for streetwear. And, that's how I kind of got my e-commerce chops. And
Yeah.
that's a large reason why we started with direct to consumer first. But it was also looking at the history of beverage brands and where you look at them, most of them go retail first.
Yeah.
And that's a great way to lose money. And I
Yeah.
didn't want to take on any investors. So what I did instead was let's do the Warren Buffett thing, do the opposite of what everybody else is doing. If everybody else is going retail
Yeah.
first, we're going direct to consumer first. They're like, how are you going to make any money like shipping glass bottles around the country? And my answer was, you have to charge a lot, you
Yeah.
know? But we're also making like the best non-alcoholic drinks in the world, so they're going to have to cost a certain amount of money for you to try them. Over time, like Curious Zero, which we just launched, it's
Yep.
our most affordably priced, elixir yet, but it's still, $6+ a bottle. It's not
Yep.
like this is not cheap. But I think that it's better to have fewer things and have higher quality. That's the
Yeah.
overall trend that I think we're seeing in America and globally, is that people are saying, you know what, maybe I don't need to have 47 cups of coffee a day. I'll have one really nice cup of coffee today. And
Yeah.
that's the same thing with our elixirs. And
Yeah.
you have to pay for it, but I think it's working out well.
For sure. So you mentioned at the beginning some of the sourcing for the ingredients in the early days, and especially at scale. Where did you guys look to then source some of the ingredients as a premium product? I know you're not pulling just an orange peel off of Florida. So
Yeah.
what did that look like for sourcing wise for you?
Attending trade shows, and starting to contact different suppliers. There's
Yeah.
one that just happened recently called Supply Side East, and they have one on the West Coast as well. And that's a great place to just like, you don't even necessarily need to go to the show. Just look at their exhibitor list and then start making your way through it. That's kind of how we
Yeah.
started. It's the same thing with facilities. If you want to find somebody who is going to make your product, you can go through a list of, SQF certified vendors, and then
Yeah.
filter them yourself. But we didn't start with like SQF vendors. We didn't know what we were doing. So, we, launched a Kickstarter, bought a bottling machine, and in a commercial kitchen in the Hudson Valley, we were making 500 bottles a week. And,
Mm,
and we learned very quickly that that doesn't scale if you're having success. So,
yeah.
you know, we had to then find somebody who would do contract manufacturing for us, and we would be doing that, you know producing every month rather than producing weekly. And that
Yeah.
started to be a lot easier over time. But yeah, you learn a lot of things pretty quickly when you make mistakes.
No, for sure. And no, I love that. I don't know if you are today, but as far as like bootstrapped, are you guys still bootstrapped today?
Yes,
100% self-made?
100%.
That's incredible. That's amazing. So, I mean, the early days of finding a co-manufacturer and then maybe even a 3PL, what point of growth did you make that transition?
Right around the 2,000 orders a month is kind of the
Okay.
sweet spot for getting a 3PL.
Yeah.
Like for a small 3PL. You can do it with smaller ones than that, but we were actually fortunate to have a partner who was doing the bottling and the shipping for us all in one place. So we didn't have to have freight go somewhere else and then ship it again.
Yeah.
Now, we're doing more like, quarterly productions roughly instead. And,
Yeah.
we're not shipping out of the same place where we're producing. That's like not possible anymore.
Yeah.
Because when you're doing tens of thousands of orders a month, you need somebody who specializes in each part of the process.
For sure.
Yeah.
Overall, for marketing, what would you say works best for you guys? Because I feel like it's definitely a growing trend, the non-alcoholic category as a whole. But education, what does that marketing look like that works well for Curious?
I think if you look at a lot of what works for us, it's highlighting the why. Like, why are you doing this? Because there's so many people now who are drinking less that we don't have to convert more people to become sober or sober curious. They're doing that themselves. And this was
Yeah.
borne out in the research, from 10 years ago, from 2015. Even back then, 75 million adult Americans don't drink alcohol, and
Mm,
another 90 million adult Americans drink two or fewer alcoholic drinks a week. That's a massive addressable market. So how do we go
yeah.
after that market? By saying like, you deserve something better, and this is something fun. This is something that is going to help you enjoy life more.
Mm,
Now we've gotten to the point where we elevate other people telling that story rather than us preaching at you. That's what we like to
yeah.
do as a brand. Is we're a relatively, faceless, anonymous brand. You're never going to see me like in an ad for direct to consumer saying like, "Hey, try my drinks." It's more
Yeah.
like people who are actually fans talking about why they like Curious. What are the adaptogens that are in each elixir that make them feel good? that support their body in some way. It's really just
Mm,
getting through to the why of it. Why are people
mm.
drinking less? And here's something that is a solution for you if you want to kick back without booze.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So what's interesting is, or I'd be curious at least as far as like seasonality goes, and riding that wave. I'm sure January is probably a heavy month, and I'm actually looking at a stat here. So, 2.5 million in sales versus 2 million last year in dry January. D- Is there seasonality behind the product where you January maybe this huge spike, and then you acquire customers during that time, hopefully retain customers. What does seasonality behind the product look like?
Yeah, I mean, definitely January is like our Super Bowl. That is the
Yeah.
time when a ton of new people are coming in. But the beautiful thing is that every month there are new people that are coming in and trying Curious,
Yeah.
and that are either looking to make a change in their life. But there's certainly peaks around it, Cameron. I think that they kind of follow the seasons that you would expect. Right around this time, around spring and kind of like April, May, there's like a definitely another spike of people being like, I need to switch up my routines. Like I need to shake off the winter, and then after the summertime, there's people who are like, I got to shake off the summer and get back to my new routine. And so September is another massive month for us. And then you
Yeah.
kind of ride this wave all through like the fall, because it's a very social season. There's sober October. You've
Hmm.
got Thanksgiving. You've got the holidays in December, and then you're into dry January again. So really,
Yeah.
the only dip that you see in our season is really kind of like the end of February and early March. But
Yeah.
still, there's new people coming in then. It's just that the percentage of people that are coming in is slightly lower.
Totally.
So the seasonality is not as pronounced as we thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
It certainly has some seasonal peaks, but every year you know there's some surprises. Like two
Yeah.
years ago in September, we were like we it more than doubled what we expected, and we're like, what is going on? And it just kind of felt like this inflection point where what you marked as a trend is less of a
Yeah.
trend and more like a wave. It's
Yeah.
like wave after wave after wave keeps coming in. And we're just thankful that we have such a great team that is able to help support when these moments happen.
Mm, it's incredible. Overall, what would you say is the main demographic of Curious Elixirs? I'm curious, kind of like age, gender, etc.
There's a few of them.
Yeah.
So, there's definitely people in their 30s, skewing slightly more female than male, that are a big cohort, live in big cities. But then there's
Hmm.
another cohort of people that are in their 40s and 50s that live like 15 to 20 minutes outside of a big city. They have a pretty big
Yeah.
house and they have a couple of cars and they like getting stuff delivered to their house.
Yeah.
So that's another huge one. And then one that has been catching fire recently is the over 60 crowd. The over 60 crowd is going fucking bananas for Curious right now. And it's really great to see because they're kind of waking up to the idea that, like, you know what, I feel great not drinking,
Mm,
and so it's been really amazing to see that, like, people in my mom's demographic are like going nuts for Curious. It's pretty awesome.
yeah. That's amazing.
But it's like a blend because there's also these people that are younger in their 20s, like once they kind of get into their late 20s and they have enough money to try Curious, then they're really starting to like it.
Yeah.
But I would say that, like, it's definitely not college kids, you
Yeah.
know. It's like
Totally.
they don't have the money for it yet. They would love to try it, and when they do, then they love it. But it's definitely kind of once they hit late 20s and up that, like,
Yeah.
the curious crowd really starts to catch fire.
Love it. So, what percentage would you say is D2C compared to retail today? I mean, it might be even heavy skewed D2C. I'm just curious.
It's changing so fast now that like, we've been self-distributed for about a decade, and now
Okay.
we have our first distributors. Like, right before this, I just got off a call with our distributor in Michigan, and
Mm,
they were surprised at, like, how fast the uptick has been. And they've gotten us into about 200 accounts in 3 or 4 months. That's
wow.
like pretty fast for one state.
That
So
is. It's
yeah,
huge.
so, like, direct to consumer still makes a big portion of our business, but it's changing so rapidly that it's hard to pinpoint the number. I don't think I have a good
Mhm.
answer for you right now.
Yeah,
Um,
that makes
well, we'll,
sense.
we'll talk we'll talk next year, and I'll have some concrete numbers for you.
No, sounds great. Awesome. Well, I'm looking at another stat here, and it's just incredible to see that projected to do 176 million in revenue by 2030, and I mean over 20x in growth in 5 years. I mean that's massive growth, and I'd be curious what would you grant a lot of the growth to, and also looking into the future, what do you see kind of enhancements that Curious will bring to continue the wave?
I think some of it is going to be through, word of mouth and just being obsessed with quality.
Yeah.
Because if you make the best of something and it's unique, then people are going to keep coming back to you for it. I think that's a large portion of it is that you can't get curious in every big box store. We're not there. You have to come to us for it. And people are like, well, isn't that like a bad thing? And to my mind, it's not. Eventually, because our mission is to transform how we drink socially. Yes, we
Hmm.
want to be in Target and we want to be in Whole Foods. We want to be in Wegmans. We want to be at every wedding and every caterer and, every hotel.
Yeah.
But we're 10 years into a 40-year mission, Cameron, and we'll get there.
Hmm.
It's just going to take some time. And also, when we're
Yeah,
able to bring the cost down a little bit, then it will make more sense for like big retail opportunities.
for sure. Looking at the flavors today and some of the offerings, what would you say is that the top seller? What's performing best today?
It depends on the season. You know,
Yeah.
some seasons it's our Curious Number 9, which is our sparkling rosé.
Hmm.
Other seasons, it's Curious Number 7, which is our champagne cocktail. Like that one works
Yeah.
great, during the holidays. People love it. And other times it's Curious Number 2, which is our spicy pineapple margarita kind of dark and stormy thing.
Hmm.
So it really depends on the month and the season because I tried to make something, and this will be for, listeners that are, or for viewers, but
Yep.
we have a circle of like our 10 drinks. And they're basically designed so that every drink is good for 3 seasons out of 4 of the year.
Yeah.
So that there's some seasonality to it, but there's also approachability. And that way you have something that is going to work, you know, pretty much anytime. I was stunned
Totally.
actually, Cameron, by how well our rosé did this winter. This was the first winter that we had Curious Number 9, and people were still buying it like
Interesting.
crazy. And we were like, we did not expect that.
Yeah.
But then again, like a lot of the country, they have warmer weather during the winter. So I think the region also has
Interesting.
something to do with it.
Interesting. So, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Curious number four, is that the citrus one?
Yeah, the blood orange
Citrus?
spritz does very
Yeah.
well, and that one sometimes takes the lead for like the for the most popular flavor, but it
That's
depends
what I'm going to
also on the
endorse
year.
myself.
Say what?
I said that's what I'm going to endorse myself as my favorite, actually, so far, too. Curious
Nice.
number four is my favorite so far. I'm just a citrus guy overall, so I think I just gravitate that way naturally, but it's really good. Really
Oh,
good.
thank you so much. And
Of course.
I have that one almost every day because it has American ginseng, which like gives you a bit of a boost without caffeine, which is
Yeah,
nice.
I love it. Well,
Yeah.
I like to conclude each episode with this. If you can share one piece of advice with an aspiring entrepreneur, maybe something you learned or regret along the way, what would you say that would be?
I'd say this came from a mentor of mine, and there's a few different things I could share, but this one is kind of resonating for me today, which is you can contact anybody in the world if you just have gentle persistence and you only ask for 5 minutes of their time. And that has served me well. That got me the job at Thrillist. That got me the job with Whoopi. That got me the.
Mhm.
It's really been transformative. And I'm like not a naturally extroverted guy who's like super confident. So that kind of gave me the permission to like go and do outreach,
Mm,
and just it's all about gently being persistent and following up and not
yeah.
over asking, just be like, hey, I love what you're doing. I'm just getting started. Can I please have 5 minutes to ask you some questions?
Mm, I love it.
And I think that that really helps, especially if you're trying to figure out what your path is. If you know what you want to do, go talk to the people who've done it before and use the same technique.
Yeah. I love that, the way you said that. And I've always wrapped up every episode with that question, and I see a lot of overlapping advice, but I've never heard the way you've told that one, and I've never heard that piece. So I mean, that's great, and I actually translate with that with the show, because the same thing when I used to pitch guests for podcasts is like, never ask for anything, like just ask for just a small section of their time, and like that's it. And I mean, it reigns true. So I love that piece. Awesome.
Thanks.
Well, yeah, JW, I just thank you so much for taking the time. And to the listeners out there, make sure to check out Curious Elixirs at curiouselixirs.com.